The Ashworth house was the biggest, quietest place anyone had ever seen. It wasn't a happy kind of quiet, though. It was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like a thick blanket you couldn't shake off. From the outside, it was all perfect green lawns and big, clean windows. But inside, it felt a bit like a museum, beautiful but empty of life. This was where the billionaire, Mr. Ashworth, lived with his little girl. He was a man who could buy anything you could think of. Fancy cars, private jets, whole companies. But the one thing he couldn't buy was a smile from his daughter. Since her mother had passed away a few years back, the little girl had just shut down. She stopped talking, stopped laughing. She became a small, silent storm cloud in the middle of this huge, perfect house. Mr. Ashworth didn't know what to do. He was used to fixing problems with meetings and money, but this was a problem he couldn't solve. So he did what he thought was best. He hired help. The best help money could find. He hired nannies. Not just one or two. Over time, he hired 18 of them. They all came with the best recommendations. Some were from famous agencies. Some had degrees in child psychology. They arrived with kind smiles and big bags full of educational toys and plans. But every single one of them left the same way. They would leave with a polite, tight-lipped smile, a very large check from Mr. Ashworth for their trouble, and a small, perfect bite mark on their hand or their arm. The little girl's teeth were surprisingly sharp. Her bite was her only language. It was her way of saying, "Go away. Leave me alone. You don't understand." The stories the housekeepers would whisper were all the same. The nanny would try to get her to eat her breakfast. Bite. She'd try to gently take away a pair of scissors. Bite. She'd try to read a bedtime story. Bite. The girl wasn't being mean for no reason. It was a wild, scared animal kind of reaction. She was a heartbroken little kid, building a fortress around herself with her own anger and sadness. Every nanny who got bitten was just another person trying to knock the walls down, and she fought them off the only way she knew how. Her father was at a loss. He felt like he was failing her every single day. He'd see a new nanny arrive with hope, and he'd see that hope disappear a week later, replaced by a bandage and a look of defeat. The file on his desk labeled "Nanny Candidates" grew thinner and thinner. His daughter's world grew quieter and quieter. The house felt less like a home and more like a beautiful, expensive cage for two very lonely people that he started to believe that maybe this was just how it would always be. That the light inside his daughter had gone out for good, and all he could do was keep her safe in this quiet, gilded world they shared. The idea of a 19th nanny felt pointless. What was the point of bringing in another person just to see them get hurt and to see his daughter's pain reinforced again? But he was also running out of options. He was a busy man, and the empty silence of the house when he was alone with her was the worst sound in the world. It was a silence full of memories of laughter that was gone. So, with a heavy heart, he told his assistant to try one more time. To find someone, anyone, who might be different. He didn't have much hope left. He just knew he couldn't stop trying. The advertisement for the nanny position didn't sound like an ad for a job. It sounded like a warning. It talked about challenging behaviors and emotional resilience, and a non-traditional household environment. The pay listed was a number so high it looked like a typo. Most sensible people who read it would think, "That's too good to be true," and move on. They'd understand that a sum of money that large was really danger pay. But one woman saw it differently. She wasn't from a fancy nanny agency. She didn't have a degree from a famous school on her wall. What she had was years of experience in a children's hospital ward, a place where kids were often too sick or too scared to be polite. She had seen real fear. She had seen real anger born from pain. She knew that sometimes a child's worst behavior wasn't about being bad. It was a cry for help that got all tangled up on the way out. She needed the job, yes. The salary could change her life. But more than that, she read between the lines of that scary ad. She didn't see a monster child. She saw a child in monstrous pain. So, she applied. A few days later, she found herself waiting in the grand hallway of the Ashworth house. It was so clean and quiet it made her own heartbeat sound loud. The man who came to meet her, Mr. Ashworth, looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in years. He had a kind face, but it was worn out, like a good book that had been left in the rain. He didn't smile. He led her not to a cheerful office, but to a room that was supposed to be a library. It was full of beautiful, unread books. Toys were scattered everywhere, but they looked untouched, like museum exhibits. In the corner, sitting on the floor with her back to them, was a small girl. She was very still. She didn't turn around. Mr. Ashworth's voice was low and tired. He skipped any pleasantries. "I have to be very clear with you," he began. He listed the facts like he was reading a legal document. The biting, the silence, the thrown objects, the 18 nannies before her. "Her last nanny lasted 4 days," he said, his voice flat. "The one before that, a week. They are all excellent, qualified people. It isn't their fault." He looked at her then, really looked at her, searching for the flicker of fear or judgment he was used to seeing. "I need to know if you understand what you're walking into. This isn't a typical childcare role. It is a management role, managing a crisis." The woman listened quietly. She didn't fidget. She didn't look shocked. She just nodded slowly, her eyes soft. She wasn't looking at the billionaire with pity. She was looking at the tired father. When he finished, there was a heavy silence. The little girl in the corner hadn't moved a muscle. Finally, the woman spoke. Her voice was calm, like the surface of a deep lake. "May I ask a question?" Mr. Ashworth nodded, bracing himself for something about time off or insurance. "What does she like?" the woman asked. "Not what she's supposed to like, not the toys you buy, but is there anything? A certain texture? A time of day that's a little easier? Does she hate the sound of the vacuum cleaner? Does she ever watch the rain?" Mr. Ashworth stared at her. He had been asked about routines, about allergies, about education plans. No one had ever asked him a question like that. He had to think hard. His mind, usually so sharp with numbers and deals, went blank for a moment. Then, a tiny memory surfaced. The gardener's cat," he said, almost surprised at himself. "A gray one. Sometimes it sits on the wall outside the sunroom. She'll watch it. She'll watch it for a long time without moving." A small, gentle smile touched the woman's lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was an understanding one. "Thank you," she said. "That's a good place to start." Mr. Ashworth felt something strange then. It wasn't hope, he was too careful for that. It was the slightest, faintest feeling of a weight being shared. Just a little. This woman wasn't here to fix his daughter like a problem to be solved. She was here to see her, to notice her. "Would you like to meet her?" he asked, his voice quieter. "Not today," the woman said, looking at the small, rigid back across the room. "She knows we're here. That's enough for today. I can start tomorrow if that's all right with you. Let her have the rest of today to just be." And with that, the 19th nanny left as quietly as she had come, leaving behind a man who, for the first time in a very long while, felt a confusing stir in his chest that wasn't entirely dread. Maybe, just maybe, it was the smallest seed of possibility. The first day, the new nanny showed up with no fancy toys. She carried a small bag with a sketchbook, some pencils, and a pack of plain crackers. She didn't march in with a big, bright, fake smile. She just walked in, nodded to the housekeeper, and went to find the girl. She found her in the sunroom, sitting in a patch of light on the floor, staring at the wall where the gray cat sometimes appeared. The nanny didn't go close. She sat down on the far side of the large room, near the doorway. She took out her sketchbook and started to draw. She didn't say a word. Not hello, not what's your name, not look what I have. She just sat and let her pencil scratch softly on the paper. The little girl didn't look at her, but the nanny could feel a change in the air. The girl's small shoulders, which had been slumped, tightened just a bit. She was aware. She was waiting for the attack, for the sweet voice trying to coax her out, for the hand trying to touch her shoulder. That it never came, for an hour. The only sounds were the clock ticking, the distant hum of the fridge, and the soft sound of pencil on paper. The nanny drew the view from the window, the wall, a tree, the empty spot where a cat might sit. Then she got up, left the sketchbook open on the floor, and walked out to make herself a cup of tea in the kitchen. She didn't tell the girl she was leaving. She just went. When she came back, the girl was in the exact same spot. But the nanny's sharp eyes noticed something. One of the pencils from her open bag, a red one, was now a few inches closer to the girl. It was a tiny thing, a test. The nanny pretended not to notice. She sat back down and continued drawing. The second day was a bit louder. The nanny brought a simple wooden puzzle. She didn't ask the girl to help. She just started doing it herself on the low table, muttering to herself in a funny voice. "Okay. Blue piece, where do you live? You look lonely. Maybe you need a green friend." She was being silly. She was making a performance for an audience of one who refused to watch. The girl watched from under her eyelashes. Then she moved. She didn't go to the table. She went to a shelf and took down a heavy, expensive porcelain figurine of a ballerina. Without a word, without a change in her blank expression, she threw it straight at the nanny's head. The nanny saw it coming from the corner of her eye. Her hospital reflexes were good. She ducked. The figurine smashed against the wall behind her, exploding into 1,000 tiny pieces. There was a ringing silence. The housekeeper in the hallway froze, waiting for the shout, the tears, the end of this nanny too. The nanny took a slow, deep breath. She looked at the shattered pieces on the floor. Then she looked at the girl, who was staring back with defiant, furious eyes, waiting for the reaction. "Wow," the nanny said, her voice still calm. "That was a very strong throw. You have good aim." She didn't scold. She didn't get angry. She didn't run to tell the father. She simply got a small dustpan and brush from the corner of the room and began, very carefully, to sweep up every single piece. She did it slowly, methodically. "We have to get all the little bits," she said, talking to herself again. "Don't want anyone to get a cut. Cuts hurt." The girl stood like a statue, confused. Her weapon had been taken away, but not in the way she expected. It hadn't caused a war. It had been turned into a boring chore about safety. The anger inside her had nowhere to go. She just watched, her small fists clenched. When every piece was cleaned up, the nanny placed the dustpan aside. She looked at the girl and said, in a normal, quiet tone, "All done. No one gets hurt on my watch." Then she went back to her puzzle, as if nothing had happened. The message was clear. "You can't scare me away. I'm not leaving." The girl, for the first time, felt a flicker of something other than rage or numbness. It was confusion. This woman was different. She was a wall that didn't hit back. She just stood there, solid and unshakable. And that was somehow more unsettling than anything that had come before. The third day dawned gray and quiet. The new nanny arrived, and the air in the big house felt different. It wasn't the usual heavy silence of sadness. It was the tense, waiting quiet before a thunderstorm. The little girl was no longer just ignoring her. She was watching her, studying her with the focus of a small, feral cat. The broken figurine had been a declaration of war, and the war was not over. The nanny went about her morning routine. She made a simple breakfast of toast and sliced apple, placing it on the table without saying a word to the girl who stood in the doorway. She sat and drank her tea, looking out at the garden. She was giving the child space, but she was also showing her that life, simple, ordinary life, was continuing around her. The girl didn't touch the food. She moved to the bookshelf in the sunroom, pulling out a large, heavy art book. She carried it not to look at it, but as a tool. Her eyes were fixed on the nanny, who was now sitting on the floor, sorting through a box of old, forgotten crayons. The nanny felt the child's gaze like a physical weight. She kept her movements slow and predictable. She hummed a little tune, something old and soft, a folk song her own grandmother used to sing. It was a sound to fill the silence, to make herself seem less like a threat. The girl took a step closer, then another. She was a small shadow in the periphery of the nanny's vision. The nanny didn't turn. She picked up a sky blue crayon, its wrapper half torn off. "This one's almost gone," she murmured to herself. "Must have been someone's favorite." That's when it happened. Small, quick footsteps. a rush of air. Before the nanny could even think to move, the little girl was there. She dropped the heavy book. Two small, strong hands clamped like vices around the nanny's forearm, pulling it towards her. And then, sharp, sudden pain. The child bit down. Hard.it was a desperate, fierce bite. The pain was instant and shocking. A bright, white-hot sting. The nanny gasped. Her whole body went rigid. Every instinct told her to yank her arm away, to shout, to push the child back. But she didn't. She froze for a second, breathing through the pain. She could feel the pressure of tiny teeth, the heat of the girl's anger burning into her skin. She looked down at the top of the child's head, at the messy dark hair. This was it. This was the moment that had broken 18 other women. This was the final test. With a force of will that felt superhuman, the nanny forced her muscles to relax. She did not pull away. She let her arm go limp in the child's grasp. Her voice, when she found it, was not a shout. It was a low, steady whisper, trembling only slightly from the effort. "I feel that," she said softly, to the top of the girl's head. "That hurts." She took another shaky breath. The child was still biting, not breaking the skin but holding on with all her might, waiting for the fight. "You are so angry," the nanny whispered, her eyes welling up not from the pain, but from a sudden, overwhelming wave of understanding for this lost, hurting child. "You have so much angry inside you. So big. It's okay to be that angry." She didn't say, "Let go." She didn't say, "Stop." She acknowledged the feeling. For a long, terrible moment, nothing changed. The bite held. The pain throbbed. Then the nanny felt the smallest shift. The terrible pressure of the jaw lessened. Just a fraction. A heartbeat later, it lessened again. The little girl's body, which had been as hard as a rock, began to tremble. It was a fine, almost invisible shaking. Slowly, slowly, the mouth opened. The girl released her arm. She didn't look up. She took a stumbling step back, her head hanging low, her chest heaving. She was looking at the floor, but her whole small frame was now shuddering with silent, soundless sobs. The furious fire had gone out, leaving only ashes and confusion on the nanny's forearm. There was a deep, red, perfect circle of teeth marks. It would bruise. It might even scar. But the skin was not broken. The nanny didn't reach for the child. She didn't try to hug her. She just sat there, cradling her throbbing arm, letting the child feel whatever she was feeling without interruption. "It's okay," the nanny said again, her voice thick. "I'm still here." And she was. She had faced the storm, and she had not run away. The wall the girl had built around herself had met something new. Not a battering ram, but a quiet, unmovable presence. And for the first time, a tiny crack had appeared, not in the wall, but in the little girl's fierce, lonely heart. The war was not over, but the first, hardest battle had ended. Not with a shout, but with a whisper. The days after the bite were different. It was as if a fever had broken. The air in the big house didn't feel as sharp, as ready to snap. The little girl didn't try to hurt the nanny again. She went back to ignoring her, but it wasn't the same kind of ignoring. Before, it had been a wall of hostility. Now, it was more like she was just very, very busy being somewhere else, and the nanny happened to be in the same room. The nanny understood this was progress. The storm of anger had passed, leaving behind a flat, empty landscape. Now, her job was to just be a quiet, steady presence in that emptiness. To plant tiny seeds and see if anything would ever grow. She stopped trying to do activities for the girl. Instead, she did them for herself, but where the girl could see. She became a one-woman show of simple, quiet living. She would sit by the big window with her sketchbook. "That tree is hard to draw," she'd say to no one in particular. "All those little branches look like a mess, but I like the way it moves." She wouldn't ask the girl to look. She would just talk softly into the room, leaving her words hanging in the air like bubbles. She brought in a small, cheap pot and some soil. She planted a single bean seed. She placed it on the sunroom windowsill. Every morning, she'd come in, water it carefully with a little cup, and say, "Good morning, Bean. Let's see what you do today." She did this with the seriousness of a scientist conducting a very important experiment. For a week, the girl pretended the nanny, the drawings, and the bean pot were all invisible. But the nanny had good eyes. She started to notice things. The red pencil from her bag was now always missing, found later under a chair across the room. The apple slices left on the plate in the morning would be gone by the afternoon, with tiny, neat bite marks. The girl was watching. She was listening. The real change happened on a rainy Thursday. The sky was the color of wet stone, and rain tapped a gentle rhythm on the glass roof of the sunroom. The nanny was drawing again. This time she was attempting a cartoon dog. It was a silly thing with big, lopsided eyes and a tail that looked like a question mark. She was giving it a helmet, muttering about how this dog was an astronaut. She felt, more than saw, a presence. The girl had drifted closer. She was standing about 5 feet away, perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the drawing. The nanny's heart gave a little thump, but she kept her hand moving slowly. She didn't smile at the girl. She didn't say, "Do you like it?" She just kept drawing the silly helmet. Then, the girl moved. She walked right up to the table. Her small hand darted out and snatched the crimson crayon from the open box. The nanny froze, her pencil hovering above the paper. This was it. Would she throw it? Would she break it? She prepared for anything. The girl looked from the red crayon in her fist to the drawing of the dog in the helmet. Her brow was furrowed in deep thought, as if solving a hard math problem. Slowly, carefully, she leaned over the paper. She didn't look at the nanny. She focused entirely on the drawing. She pressed the red crayon to the paper, right on top of the astronaut helmet. And she scribbled. It was a furious, jagged, zigzagging mess of red. It covered the helmet completely in wild, angry lines. When she was done, she dropped the crayon and took 2 quick steps back, her eyes wide, as if shocked by her own action. She was waiting, the nanny could see, for the scolding. For the "you ruined it." The nanny looked down at the drawing. Her nice, silly cartoon dog was now wearing a helmet that looked like it was on fire or had been struck by lightning. It was destroyed, but it was also the first thing the child had ever done to communicate with her. The nanny nodded slowly, studying the red scribble with great seriousness. "Ah," she said, her voice full of genuine interest. "I see. There's a fire. The helmet's on fire. That's a big problem for astronaut dog." She picked up her pencil. "He's going to need an emergency hose." And she began to draw a silly, wobbly hose coming from the dog's backpack, pointing at the red scribble. Or maybe it's not fire. Maybe it's really angry bees inside the helmet. The girl just stared. The expected anger never came. Her violent red scribble hadn't ended the game. It had become part of the game. The nanny had accepted it without judgment and woven it into the story. The girl didn't smile. She didn't speak. But the tight, closed look on her face softened, just for a second. The smallest spark of curiosity flickered in her eyes, where before there had only been a dull blankness or burning anger. She had sent a message in the only language she had left, a language of destruction. And for the first time, someone had not just heard it but had answered back. They were talking, not with words, but with a red crayon and a silly drawing of a dog in trouble. It was a start. The red crayon scribble was a key turning in a rusty lock. After that day, the silence in the sunroom was no longer empty. It was a busy silence, full of unspoken things. The little girl didn't suddenly start talking, but she started participating. She would drift over to the table where the nanny was drawing or working on the little bean plant, which had now sprouted a thin, green shoot. She would watch for a long time, then she would take a crayon or move a puzzle piece, always when she thought the nanny wasn't looking. The nanny, of course, always noticed, but she never made a big deal of it. She would just casually say, "Oh, good. The blue piece was lonely," or, "That's a strong green color. Good choice." She was building a bridge, one tiny, careful plank at a time. The biggest change came with sound. The nanny had a habit of humming while she worked. It wasn't proper singing, just bits and pieces of old songs that popped into her head, often off-key. She'd hum while wiping a table or sorting crayons or watering the bean plant. It was just a habit, a way to fill the quiet with something gentle. One afternoon, the nanny was building a pillow fort. It was a sad-looking thing with blankets slipping off the backs of chairs. She was struggling to get a large sofa cushion to stay upright in a corner, pretending to talk to it. "Stay up, you silly thing. You're supposed to be a wall. Walls are firm." She started humming to herself as she worked, a simple, repetitive tune from a lullaby. She fumbled with the cushion again, and it slumped over. She let out a soft, fake sigh and hummed the tune once more, a little louder this time, and then she heard it. The smallest sound, like the whisper of a leaf. A tiny, soft hum, matching her exact pitch. The nanny froze, her hands on the fallen cushion. She didn't turn around. She didn't stop. She kept humming, her heart pounding so loud in her chest she was sure the whole house could hear it. She moved to another part of the fort, her humming steady. A few seconds later, it came again, a faint, wispy echo of her own melody. The little girl, sitting across the room with a book in her lap, was humming. Her eyes were fixed on the pages, as if the sound wasn't coming from her at all. But it was. It was the first voluntary sound she had made in front of another person in years. Tears pricked the back of the nanny's eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. This was not the time for a big reaction. That would scare the sound away, like a shy bird. So she just smiled softly to herself, kept humming and said, "This wall needs some help. Maybe it needs a friend to hold it up." The humming from across the room stopped, but the air felt different. It felt alive. The next big moment happened a few days later. The pillow fort had become a semi-permanent structure in the sunroom. The nanny was trying to fix a sagging roof made from a large, flowery bedsheet. She was making a show of it, getting tangled, pretending the sheet was winning. "Oh, for goodness sake," she said, her voice light and playfully frustrated. "This corner just won't stay. It's being so stubborn. I need a brilliant architect or a pillow engineer." She kept fussing, not looking at the girl, who was watching intently from the entrance of the fort. Then she saw small feet in socked feet step closer. The girl moved slowly, her face serious. She walked up to the drooping corner of the fort, studied it for a moment, then picked up a heavy, thick book from the floor. She didn't say a word. She carefully placed the book on the edge of the flopping sheet, weighing it down. It worked. The corner stayed. The nanny looked at the fix, then at the girl. She gave a solemn, approving nod. "Excellent engineering," she said. "Very smart." The girl looked at her own hands, then at the fixed fort. She opened her mouth. It closed. Then, a single rusty word, so quiet it was almost just a shape of breath, floated into the space between them. "There." The word hung in the air. It was quiet, rough from disuse, but perfectly clear. The nanny felt a jolt go right through her, a feeling of pure, golden wonder. She kept her face calm, her smile gentle. She nodded again. "Yes," she agreed softly, as if they'd been chatting all along. "There. It's perfect now. Thank you." The girl quickly looked down, a faint flush of pink on her cheeks. She didn't say anything else. She turned and went back to her spot, picking up her book. But everything had changed. The silence that followed was no longer a wall. It was just a quiet space, and in that space, a single precious word now lived. The bridge between their two worlds wasn't just made of crayons and hums anymore. It had its first real word. And with one word, everything became possible. The father noticed the changes in pieces, like someone slowly adding color to a black and white photograph. First, it was the reports from the housekeeper. "No incidents," she would say, her voice holding a note of surprise. Then it was, "They were in the sunroom all afternoon. Quiet." Finally, one evening, she said, "I heard the little one humming while she was drawing." The father would listen, nod, and feel a strange, fragile hope take root in his chest. But he was afraid to water it. He had hoped before, and watched that hope get bitten, screamed at, and broken. So he kept his distance, observing from doorways, a ghost in the hall of his own home. He saw the pillow fort that took over the sunroom corner. He saw the bean plant on the windowsill, now a twisting green vine reaching for the light. He saw the papers everywhere, covered in silly drawings and those fierce, wonderful red scribbles that now seemed less like attacks and more like a secret language. He saw his daughter, not slumped in a corner, but engaged. Her back was straight. Her eyes followed the nanny's movements. She was present, but he had not yet seen her smile. Not since before the world went dark. That, he thought, might be gone for good. A smile was a light he believed he had extinguished by failing her, by being too lost in his own grief to find hers. Then, one afternoon, his schedule broke. A major meeting in the city was cancelled. His driver brought him back to the big, quiet house in the middle of the day. The house felt different. It wasn't just quiet. It was peaceful. He heard a sound from the sunroom. It was the nanny's voice, but she was doing something strange. She was reading, but she was using all these different, ridiculous voices. A squeaky high voice, a grumbly low one, a voice that sounded like it had bubbles in it. He stood in the shadow of the hallway, unseen. His daughter was sitting on the floor inside the pillow fort. She wasn't just sitting. She was curled on her side on a soft blanket, a picture book open beside her. She was listening. Her body was relaxed in a way he hadn't seen in years. One small hand was resting under her cheek. The nanny was reading a story about a foolish goat and a clever old tree. She got to the part where the goat was trying to argue with the tree, and she gave the goat a voice that was so stubborn and silly, a kind of grumpy bleat. And then it happened. His daughter's face, usually so still and serious, began to change. A slight crinkling appeared at the corners of her eyes. Her lips, which were always pressed in a line or turned down, began to soften. They parted just a little, and then a real, true, sun-bright smile spread across her face. It was a little shy, but it was deep and genuine. It lit up her whole being. It was the smile of a child lost in a moment of pure, simple joy. The father felt his breath catch in his throat. A physical ache, sweet and sharp, filled his chest. He had to put a hand on the wall to steady himself. He was not looking at a problem he had paid to be managed. He was looking at his little girl. She was still in there. She had just been waiting all this time for someone to be so quietly, so stubbornly there with her that she felt safe enough to find her way back. The nanny saw the smile too. She didn't stop reading or make a big fuss. She just glanced over, met the girl's shining eyes, and her own face softened into a warm, quiet smile of understanding. Then she went back to the story, her silly goat voice even funnier now. The father backed away silently. He didn't go into the room. He didn't want to break the spell. He went to his big, empty study and sat in his chair, looking out at the garden. He didn't see the business reports on his desk. He saw his daughter's smile. The silence in the house that evening was a new kind of silence. It wasn't heavy or empty. It was the comfortable, warm quiet of a day well lived. When he readied for bed, he walked down the hall. The door to his daughter's room was slightly ajar. He heard the nanny's voice, soft and steady, finishing a bedtime story. Then he heard a small, clear voice, just one word, heavy with sleep. "Tomorrow?" And the nanny's gentle reply, "Yes, tomorrow." He stood there for a long moment in the dim hallway. The journey wasn't over. There would be hard days, steps backward, words that were still stuck. But the fortress of solitude had fallen. It had been taken down not by force, but by patience, by a red crayon, by a silly voice, and by a smile that changed everything. For the first time in a very long time, the big house didn't feel like a museum of his failures. Felt, simply and surely, like a home.